Okay, time now for our PIX panel. And joining me this morning, Jamie Deline from our sister station in Albany, WTEN, and Jeff Coltin, the City Hall Bureau Chief from City and State New York. So thank you both for coming on. So never a dull moment when it comes to Congressman George Santos. Before the break, we recapped the latest, including a newly released poll from Siena showing the lack of support behind Santos. So let's take a closer look at the numbers. Just about 60% of registered voters think Santos should resign. Only 17% want him to stay in office, and more than half of Republicans disapprove of the congressman. So Santos frequently points to the support he got during the election, but this poll shows that's waning. So, Jeff, do you think the congressman will actually serve his full term? And how might that FEC investigation come into play?
I would be surprised if he serves out the full term, simply because it seems like he has a lot of possibility of criminal prosecution. We know there are many different investigators looking into him, federal, local. I have no idea what they're finding. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, but it just seems unlikely that George Santos is going to be able to make it 2 years without facing some sort of charges and potentially then a conviction. So yes, the FEC is one of those groups looking into him, and campaign finance is no joke. I mean, there are some real penalties that you can get in, including criminal prosecution.
Yeah, Jeff, you recently wrote an article looking at potential replacements for Congressman Santos. So if by some chance Santos resigns or he's arrested and there is a special election, who are the Republicans looking to put up as a candidate?
Yeah, look, the Nassau County Republican Party has totally disowned the guy at this point. And there are a lot of Republicans that think they can hold on. There's also a lot of Democrats that think they can flip the seat back. There's names out there, including Robert Zimmerman, the Democrat who ran against him in November, folks like Josh Lafazan, a Nassau County legislator. That's on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, who knows? There's some talk of State Senator Jack Martins, a Republican who's been elected before. But especially in the Republican Party, everybody expects the party to just kind of pick somebody in a closed-door meeting and put them forward if this situation comes forward where there's an opening in the seat.
Yeah, and in that same Siena poll, New Yorkers were asked about Governor Hochul, and it looks like her term is off to a positive start. The governor received a 56% approval rating and a 48% favorability rating, her highest yet since she took office. So, Jamie, can you tell us what's working for Governor Hochul right now?
Yeah, actually, it was a little bit surprising to some of the Siena pollsters that her approval ratings were so high, because she had such a close election back in November. But so far, I think a lot of people are happy with the fact that she, in her State of the State, talked about giving discretion to judges when it comes to bail reform, increasing the minimum wage. I know that got a lot of applause when she said, like, let's peg inflation to the minimum wage. So there's a lot of things that she has going for her right now.
And Jamie, the governor certainly faced some tough criticism on crime during the election, especially when it comes to bail reform. You just mentioned it. So where do New Yorkers, where do they stand on the issue of bail reform?
It was interesting because the Siena poll showed that Democrats have a slightly higher approval of trying to give judges more discretion when it comes to serious crimes. I know usually when we think of bail reform, we think of Republicans wanting to see change. But this is something that will likely be talked about in budget discussions, so we'll get a greater sense of what will be in the budget in a few weeks.
Mayor Eric Adams, he delivered his State of the City address last week, and he broke down his goals into 4 sections: jobs, safety, housing, and care. So, Jeff, what do you think will be the hardest plan for the mayor to actually implement and get into action?
He had a lot of ideas out there, that's for sure. As always, safety is a very difficult one to handle. Just so much of that is basically outside the mayor's control. So yes, the mayor has continued to focus on crime and public safety. On Friday, he had a press conference with the governor about safety in the subways and about how riders are starting to feel safer, according to some recent polls. But, you know, with Mayor Adams, it always comes back to public safety. And that's not just about the police and about more policing. That's also about, you know, providing services to people, providing housing to people. It's a big issue, and it's all interconnected.
And we saw several of our local congressmen and senators come together in D.C. this week to demand President Biden reverse the expansion of Title 42. The current measures, they say, leave many who have a right to seek an asylum without an option. So let's take a quick listen at what they had to say.
Title 42 is not a solution. It is part of the problem.
This administration is making it effectively impossible to seek refuge at our border.
Let's expand legal pathways for migrants and refugees to this country.
So, Jamie, will the president look to change the current immigration policies? Do we know? Do we have a sense at this point?
At this point, it's to be determined.
Absolutely. But Jeff, what do you think? Weigh in.
Look, there's a lot of these more progressive Democrats that are asking the president, say, where are your values? Are you going to put your care, your moral care for these people ahead of other concerns about the cost of, housing immigrants to the country, that sort of thing. Of course, this is a complicated issue, but yes, this is a lot of Democrats calling on the president to, really put his money where his heart is. And I think it's an interesting situation that we're seeing kind of infighting within the party on this.
Yeah, we have just about 30 seconds left, but Jamie, I want to connect with you on the ERA. The state legislature passed the Equal Rights Amendment for the second time. Is the state any closer to codifying abortion rights?
Right. So it had to pass in 2 consecutive legislatures before it can go onto the ballot in November for the public to vote. And if it does, that would mean that women would be specifically mentioned in the state constitution, and abortion outcomes would be mentioned, as well as providing protections for members of the LGBTQ community. So this is something that the voters will get to vote on in November.
Jamie, Jeff, thank you both for coming on today, and we'll be right back.